Hey, folks, this is Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson. On this episode of Tennessee Today, I have a really good conversation with Randy Ellison. Randy is the president of Targoz Market Research. They're a polling firm in Nashville, Tennessee, and they do a lot of political polling. They also do, private marketing kind of polling and that kind of thing. But we have a really good, detailed conversation about polling, how it works, how you can, what polling you can trust, what polling you don't trust, how AI is now being utilized as a tool within the polling industry, how candidates at the local level, the state level, the national level can use polling to understand what the public or what their voters are thinking and therefore shape messages and frame messages. It's a really fascinating conversation. And in those of us in the political world, we rely heavily on polling to help us understand what's going on in our community. I hope you'll take the time to listen. It's really, really good. Randy does a really good job about breaking down the structure of polling and how it all works. Do you ever wonder what's really going on in government, locally, in the state of Tennessee, and across the country? I'm Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson, and on Tennessee Today, we dive into the issues that shape our communities from local policy to national debates. Each episode, I break down key topics and issues, share my perspective from over 20 years in the Tennessee legislature, and talk with guests about the decisions that impact your daily life. I hope you enjoy these honest conversations and that they help you stay informed and engaged. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Tennessee Today wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Before we get into talking about polling, how you do it, how it should be utilized, accuracies, inaccuracies, tell me a little bit about how you got to kind of where you are. What put you on this journey and how you got into polling?
Well, I went to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, graduated with a degree in economics and minor in political science. And at that time, one of the big subject areas was public choice economics, which is sort of the marriage between politics and econ. A lot at that time talked about polyeconomics, and my plan was to go to DC, go to grad school, and pursue that as sort of a career. And when I got there, it changed the world. Everybody goes to DC to try to change the world, and then you meet up with government.
Yeah. Now, well, see how that's working out for us. But anyway,
sure. So I found a program at George Washington University, the other overpriced George, as we used to refer to it. There's George Mason, GW, and Georgetown, and it was political management and politics, and it's more on the issues management side of it, how to run campaigns. How to manage issues in legislation. And it was a really good experience. And
wait a second. That's really interesting. I had no idea. So is that like a subcategory of political science?
It's actually a little bit different because political science gets rooted in academia, and it's sort of, from the practical application. So it's sort of the theoretical side, sometimes the idealistic side of it, rather than the bare bones reality. And this is what the program was kind of built around. And there's several around the country. American has one, the other private university in DC. But GW had a really good program, still there, Graduate School of Political Management. And I don't know if you're familiar with like MBA programs. So if you go to an MBA program, they typically take the students and put them into pods, and those pods go through the entire program together. We kind of self-selected into that. So I met a woman who would become my wife. She's messaging and speech and a great writer. One that worked on the Hill as a press secretary. One did advanced work for the White House, those types of things. And it turned out my part of the pod was numbers and strategy. That was my strong point. I've been at this ever since. Now, a large part of my business, I work with a lot of private sector businesses, probably about 60%, and we do public affairs about 30 or 40%.
Wouldn't you say that most, let me ask this another way. Most political polling organizations, there's not enough business in just political polling to do just political polling. Don't most of you diversify and get into other kind of market research and such?
Well, that used to be the case. So in even years, you did a lot of political work. Odd years, you do more private sector stuff. I'm pretty consistent between both, and I kind of like it that way for a variety of reasons. We do a lot in the B2B categories, so like supply chain management software and big manufacturing, property and casualty insurance, and those types of things. And the reason I like that balance is in those sectors, there's not a hard accounting for how successful you are. On the political side, there is. Every even year, there's an accounting in November of how well you did. So I'll give an example. I'm here in Nashville. It's where we're based. If I'm doing a brand awareness study, let's say of healthcare, there's Vanderbilt, there's St. Thomas, there's TriStar. There's not a hard accounting that says we were right about whose awareness and how they ranked. When it comes to an election, there's a hard accounting. We know that. So we take the learnings that we learned from the political side and apply it for our private sector clients. Conversely, the private sector is usually a little bit ahead on the technology side. So we're able to take those things and apply it to our public affairs work. So it's a nice marriage, and we kind of like it that way.
Do you now? Do you have like two separate teams? One team that does the private sector and another team that does the politics, or do people do politics and private sector?
It's a bit of a mix. I have someone on the team that's focused, sort of like big brand trackers, and others who are more on the day-to-day on the political side. So I'm kind of a unicorn on that I can kind of do both sides of the coin. And it actually really helps. A big topic is like affordability. And we do a lot in the property casualty insurance. So I see what's happening with homeowners insurance, all the different issues around those types. And there's legislation in Florida and South Carolina and Texas and other places where we do a lot of business. So we take those learnings and able to apply it on our public affairs work as well.
So like a magician, I doubt you're going to tell me all the secrets of how it works. But how does polling work? How should people look at polling? How should good pollsters carry out polling? You've got push polling, which I'd love for you to comment on, because a lot of the people in the public don't recognize what kind of poll they're actually taking. They just think they're taking a poll or a survey as they might see it. So, how does it work? What's the magic?
Well, that is a very long subject, but we've got some time here to talk about it. So,
well, you got 60 seconds. I mean, look, you got a MBA from George Washington University. You ought to be able to answer this in an elevator ride.
Well, there's three elements, and I'll take it from the approach of maybe journalist. All right, the AAPC, Columbia School of Journalism, Poynter Institute all instruct reporters on how to report on polls, and they give them certain things they look for. One thing is they want to know the sample size, obviously. You want to make sure that you're talking to enough people that's statistically relevant. A good example, we work with the Beacon Center on the Beacon poll here in Tennessee. It's a regular poll.
Good people, had them on the show already. Justin Owen was on the show a few months ago.
I saw that. Justin's a good guy, and the organization's been a good partner for us. Mark Cunningham over there as well. We put together that poll because we thought there was a big need for it. So using that as sort of an example, there's 1,200 registered voters we talk to on a regular basis on Tennessee, and we do a lot of policy-oriented type stuff. Now, the other thing that reporters are instructed to look at is what is called the margin of error. And it's typically expressed plus or minus 3 points, let's say. So on a 1,200 poll, it's about, I think it's 2.8, something like that. And it's, let's say candidate A is at 49%, candidate B is at 46%. So what it says, the range of possibilities for that poll is the midpoint's 49. In reality, it could be anywhere from 46 to 49 to 52. All right. Conversely, the candidate B is in the 43, 46 to 49 range. Now, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here because it's one of my pet peeves.
Oh, good. That's good. I love when people rant. That's great. By the way, I get people call me on the phone or email me or Facebook me, and they rant frequently. So I'm very comfortable with this environment that you're creating here.
Well, it's mostly against reporters, not necessarily to you. So I think
I even like this more. I like to do that rant as well, so I may chime in with you.
So, a phrase that you will hear, particularly in the national press, is in this case, it's a 3-point spread. The margin of error is 3 points, and everybody says, you know what? It's a dead heat, statistical dead heat. It's even. Now, that's not true. The range of possibilities for candidate A is 3 points greater than the opportunities for candidate B. All right, candidate A is ahead by 3 points. Now, a lot can happen between when the poll is taken and election day. So the reason that is such a big, phrase that gets used a lot is candidate B is trying to make sure donors are contributing to the campaign and the money spigot stays on. You're trying to keep supporters activated because, you never know, there's an October surprise, a news story that's going to drop, a shoe that's going to drop, that's going to change things. You want to make sure that you're heading into election day with everybody firing. So, you have to be careful with that in the statistics. And, in fairness, reporters' job is to accurately tell stories, but they're writers. They write compelling copy. Math and stats is not really their forte. So, that's one of the things that really bothers me. The other thing is you'll hear, 95% confidence on there. And what that basically says, if we did the same study 100 times, 95 of those, it's going to fall within that range. That leaves 5 polls in there that statistically we're probably going to miss on. It's just the randomness of stats. There's nothing we can do about it. And occasionally we're going to have a miss. We can't get around that. And getting it right is really a big part of it. And that's the reason I talked about earlier. The public sector work really does, help us with our private sector work as well.
Yeah. Did you have to take a lot of math when you were in school, or statistics, I know we kind of chuckle at that, but the reality of it is, statistics and understanding math and understanding margins of error, statistical methodology. All those things. If you don't have some kind of level of understanding of that, then you do tend to just take at face value whatever is reported to you. He's ahead by 4 points or whatever, right?
Yes, you do need to have an understanding of it. And that's the reason I mentioned the econ background. I approach it, somewhat as an economist sometimes, or from an economics background. And, economics is, we're studying the behavior of markets, consumers, producers, et cetera. It's no different if I'm trying to figure out if someone's going to buy a particular product or vote for a particular candidate. It's still trying to understand behavior in some measure.
So for the I'll talk about the political candidate in a second, but for the average citizen out there looking at the plethora of polls that the media reports on, and quite frankly, sometimes I think the media reports on the poll to frame it however they want to best frame a particular situation, whether it's about an individual candidate or it's about some kind of domestic or foreign issue that's going on. I think they can use polls. It's kind of like statistics, right? You can kind of use it, shape it the way you want it to create the narrative that you want to tell. How does a person just that hears information about a poll or looks at a poll, how do they determine, okay, this is a reasonable poll, this is a good poll? Is it just based on how many people you polled, the margin of error, the reputation of the polling entity? What's the indicators that people should look for?
A little bit, it's all of the above, and the transparency of the information being presented. All right, I'll give you an example. On the Beacon poll we talked about, they have a website. We post all the crosstabs, all the questions, how it was done, all of the stats behind it. It's completely transparent. So you don't have to rely on an article that you might read, the Knoxville News Sentinel or the Tennessean or the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, to see what it is. You can go to their website, and we actually put a function on there where you can run your own crosstabs if you want to, so you can make your own numbers at some point.
Okay, for those who don't do this for a living, what's a crosstab?
A crosstab basically takes every question that's in the poll and looks at the responses based off of different demographics. So it could be male, female, by age group 18 to 34, sometimes Trump voters, sometimes Harris voters, You can look at it by ethnicity, a whole variety of different measures. And that's what we do. One of the tools that we like to use in-house and our clients really like too is when you look at the crosstabs, they're all color-coded. So if something's statistically relevant, it's color-coded so your eye will draw to it as you go through it. Now, we talked about reputation, okay? And transparency, I think, is important. A good poll national I like to look at is the Harris-Harvard poll. And you can go to their website every month. They post it. It has a PowerPoint slide in there and all the crosstabs. You can see how they ask the questions, but most importantly, you can see the trend lines on it. Now, I'll say early in my career, one of my early mentors ran Lou Harris and did the Harris poll for a long time. So I'm a little bit partial to him in that manner. Last 2 or 3 years before he retired, he taught me a lot about it. So I may be a little biased with him, but I think that's a good one to get a good pulse on what's going on in the national scene. But looking at that and not just looking at the news stories about it, and if you're really interested in the topic, go look at it and see, did they accurately reflect what the pollster told them, and did they read the crosstabs correctly? So it's not always the case. You hope it is, but it's not always the case.
So if we're doing math and I look at some numbers and I count them up and I go 2 + 2, it's going to equal 4. And you look at that same group of numbers and you go 2 + 2 and it equals 4. But if I look at the same information that you provided and we're looking at the same crosstabs and we go through all the same process, can I draw a different conclusion than you draw?
Sure. Everybody can look at it, and there's a couple of different paths up the mountain. You were asking about secrets, polling secrets.
And I'm not asking you to give them away because they'll kick you out of the club if you do that, and I don't want you to get kicked out. But there is a secret sauce to this, I believe.
There is, in terms of how we weight data and everything. But one of the, I'm very transparent. I think sunshine on what I'm doing and making sure that the users of our information knows how we did it, where we came from, and we're part of the transparency. There's a group, American Association of Public Opinion Researchers, and they have a transparency initiative with the New York Times, which we're a part of. So to remain in that club, I have to be very transparent about our methods and how we do a lot of different things. So I have no problem talking about that. But you were talking about, I'll give you an example. If you have a topic, let's say a particular legislative proposition that's up, and there's 40% support for it, all right, let's say 45%. So a reporter might look at that and say, well, less than half of registered voters support this effort. But on the flip side, having done this for a long time, I can tell you, if you can get 40% of voters to agree to a single topic, it's actually a really strong point. And that's sort of, having somebody that's actually looked at it and been through some of the wars with it and been on the wrong side of it too. We learn more from our mistakes sometimes than, from our wins. So looking at it from that standpoint. So there are two ways to look at it.
Yeah, no, and that's what I talk about when we were talking about how the media often reports polling. If it's 70% of people are for something that maybe the narrative that doesn't fit the narrative that they want, they'll say 30% of people are against it, and you're like, well, yeah, but the 70% were for it, or whatever the number might be. And one of the things when we talked to Justin Owen from the Beacon Center, we did talk about polling and the polling that they do and transparency and all that. But one thing I did not really touch on with him that I want to touch on with you, because I think you probably even have more expertise, is when you do weighting, I mean, you at some point you have to make a subjective choice about how much you're going to weight you're going to apply to a particular question. Can you help listeners kind of understand how you make those decisions and what the weighting what that actually means when people hear you say, well, how you weight the question can also often determine what the outcome is?
Sure. When we collect responses, whether it's online, where we're using voter files, etc., we may not get the exact distribution of responses that we desire. All right. We try to aim for it. For example, let's say that a district is 49% male, 51% female. All right. Let's say a state. And the responses we get back are 45% male and higher on the female side. What we will do is we will correct for that. So we'll raise the value of the responses of the male respondent to make it match 49%. Okay, so we're fixing errors. Now, we do what we call stratification, not to get too far in the weeds, but we distribute survey links, let's say, to the percentage of people, by demographic group and by political affiliation that we think matches that district, state, county, whatever. It's difficult in a state like Tennessee because we're in a non-registration state. In registration states, we know who's registered as a Republican, we know who's a Democrat and who's an independent. We can look at those voter files and have a pretty accurate idea of their demographics, their income, their education levels, how often they turn out, etc. In a state like Tennessee, where we don't, we have to kind of model it. And that's where it gets kind of messy between different pollsters. Everybody sort of has their way of, and their data sources. There's Aristotle, which I've worked with a long time. There's L2. There's other providers of voter data. And you're trying to estimate what that looks like. And weighting is just basically a way we fix at the end of, when we're doing our analysis to make sure it matches what we think the demographics of that district, county, state, whatever it is. So,
yeah, even though you go through all those sort of statistical gymnastics, are there issues where you're polling that you just go, we just missed it? We didn't account for this or we didn't account for that, and we just missed it.
Yeah, sometimes it happens. We've been fortunately on the right side most of the time. So, and there's also a misperception, I think, that public polls are less accurate than private polls for candidates, let's say. And there's some truth to that because there's more money being spent sometimes with candidate polls. But there are misses, and I'll give you an example. I was surprised with Romney in 2012, but I think their campaign was more surprised than I was. They thought they had that one in the bag. In reality, we know that didn't happen.
A lot of people miss that one. Yeah.
And one I was on the right side was in 2016 in Trump. And what happens typically when that occurs as an industry, it's our job to get it right. So there was a lot of autopsies conducted afterwards to find out what happened. And we were talking about weighting, and that issue, what was identified is we had an inordinate amount, and I'm talking generally as an industry, not our company specifically, but that there were too many college-educated voters in everybody's samples, and they tend to skew more Democrat in terms of voting performance nationally. Varies from district to district, but that's in general weighted. So they undercounted those with just a high school degree, which is a problem like in the state with Tennessee, where we're not a registration state, so we don't have hard numbers. So we're modeling a lot of this and making some estimates off of it. So everybody started to make changes. The issue with that, pollsters are a lot like generals. We're always fighting the last war instead of looking at the next war. And every December and January, I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to poke holes in what I plan to do the next year. So what's coming next? Where do we need to go? What kind of mistakes, could we potentially make, and how do we fix it?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting how, and it's been my experience that polls most of the time get it right, particularly when you get into their margins of error and you account for that. But of course, and I've learned in my legislative life that when you give people a specific number, they don't listen to, well, it might be this or it might be that. They just listen to the specific number. In terms of the way you poll now, I guess historically, maybe when you first started doing this, there was a lot of paper polling, maybe telephone polling. How has that changed over the time of your career in polling?
When I first started,
and what should candidates know about that?
Whoa, okay. Let's start with the first part of that. When I started, the gold standard was phone. Okay. I shifted to online and using online sample probably really, really early. In the cycle, probably, early aughts, probably. So we're talking very early in the cycle. And that was predominant up until I'd say probably 4 or 5 years ago, and everybody went to voter sample. So you can buy a sample of voters within a district, and they append their cell phone number. And today, most people, for candidates and for just horse race type stuff, are sending out text by SMS and then having people respond that way. We do a lot of online panel work, and we spend a lot of time trying to make sure data quality is addressed. So, when I get responses, first thing I do is run through and make sure that, we don't have bots, we don't have AI answering. So we throw out about 30% of our responses. And we always over collect to account for that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, data quality, and it's been an issue in the private sector. It's also, an issue for public affairs type work and political work as well, because you may look at a voter list and it may have a cell phone number, but are you actually contacting the voter at that cell phone? Is it being spoofed? Is it an old cell phone number somebody's using to answer a poll? Those types of things. So there's a whole lot of things that go into it in terms of data quality and trying to make sure you have it right. And it's, we're like financial institutions, Amazon, Spotify, and everybody else trying to fight this kind of stuff. So that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And the technological change and the speed of it is just off the charts. AI is the one that's really big now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we're talking about AI at all kinds of levels: public sector, private sector, government level. I mean, it's a big discussion about. It's positive. I'm on the AI council for the state, and it's the upside is incredible, but there's a nefarious downside to it as well that I think everybody's trying to figure out. So, Randy, how is AI influencing what's going on in the polling space now with companies like yours?
It's increasingly being used. The American Association of Political Consultants did a survey of their members, taking a look at how many are actually using AI in campaign work. Axios did an article about it earlier this week, and what they found, and that's sort of what I'm seeing as well, is Republican candidates are using it at a much higher rate than Democratic candidates. I think Democrats are limiting on a national level most of their folks to Gemini, which is a Google product, and very bare bones. The adoption is increasing a lot, and a lot of it is we talked about measuring voter attitudes. One of the things that I heard this 4 or 5 years ago from Microsoft at a conference, is building synthetic sample, and it's AI replicas of consumers. Well, we've also got that with voters now. So there's AI voters that gives campaigns an idea of what to test. So if I have this message, how will voters respond to it? And it's an iterative process. So like in our shop, we would take that information and then go actually test it with real voters and see if it works. So instead of whiteboarding a whole lot of stuff all day long, you can go test it with AI. And I do a Substack called Pollster's Almanac as well. I'm going to spend some time on that coming up as well.
So, wow, this is a rabbit hole we could really run down, and I'm going to try and avoid doing that. So how would the public know that the information that a pollster is reporting is not an AI-generated result versus a real human result if there is no requirement for a disclaimer?
That is the reason you need to look at polls that adhere to the transparency initiative that the AAPR is doing, with the New York Times. Because we have to disclose how we recruited the people, how we got the responses. We can't just use AI bots, But as a tool, if you're spitballing ideas around a conference table, that's the way you do it. And then say, okay, now let's go do an actual poll and talk to voters and see if that matches. Because sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And you don't want to be on the wrong side of that if you want to win.
Golly, this is just, we could do a whole program on this because this is, the whole AI thing's fascinating. But the average person is they're not gonna look at your crosstabs. They're not gonna look at any of that. They're going to take it, and some of it's just going to be confirmation bias. I already believe this, and so this is just confirming what I already believe. But it is kind of frightening to think that somebody could create a poll that's completely generated by artificial intelligence. And I guess who is the refereeing body that says, hey, that's not a legitimate poll?
Well, it's up to the press and it's up to the organizations that we adhere to. I'm a member of ASMR. It's a worldwide, society for public opinion market research. And, we have guidelines that we have to follow, and I follow them very closely. AOPR in the US has the same thing. So looking at those types of polls, if it's, from a partisan news site, they're more likely to go push the narrative that they want pushed. So you have to be careful as a consumer. But, a whole nother topic is, the disintegration, of a fair and balanced media also plays a role in this as well. And we don't have the referees we need for a lot of this kind of stuff.
Let me ask you a question from someone who really doesn't know as much, obviously, about this kind of stuff. What's the difference between, say, a survey and a poll? Because I can do a survey, an online survey, and get 100 people to give me a response. Can I draw any conclusions from a survey versus a poll, or are they really very similar? Is a poll just a more sophisticated kind of survey?
Polls are typically not self-selected. You're being chosen to answer. The other is, let's say a newspaper, post, or a news station post, answer our poll, that typically drives a lot of activist types, volunteers who are very passionate about a particular topic. It's not reflective of the overall population. So on the private sector, we talk about a survey of customers, a poll is more towards the political side. But in both cases, we're doing something statistical, and we're thinking about who are we inviting to answer it, just not anybody that wants to go on there willy-nilly. And making sure that we know that that person is who they say they are, and we have a good measure. If somebody's, clicking on a link to, a local TV station and answering there, they have no idea who did it, what their intentions are, etc., and how many times they've answered it as well. So,
yeah, we have and I think all of our local news stations do some kind of poll at the end or beginning of every newscast, and then we have a local online paper that every day there's a different question on there, and it'll be 60, 80% or whatever people. And I've always been curious, whether there's any reliability to that kind of survey. And then you'll see people go online on their Facebook page or Instagram or YouTube channel or whatever. I want to be fair to all of the different platforms. And they'll post a Survey Monkey kind of survey, what do you think about our property tax proposal? I'm planning on reducing it. Well, I can guarantee I'm going to get about a 90% positive response rate to that. You've talked a lot about this, but I don't think you've really defined it for the folks who are listening. That is, when you say private and public polling, what's the difference between a private and a public poll?
Well, what I'm talking about there is for, a non-political organization. It could be a property and casualty insurer trying to figure out, it's like, how many people are aware of my, software, whether it's in the US or Canada or in Europe. Or, what is the awareness of, my hospital or healthcare organization in a particular city? That would be more of the private. And it's marketing oriented typically. The way I define marketing is it's helping customers identify a need or a want and developing a product to address it. And the public affairs side is not that much different. Identifying an issue that matters to voters and how it could be addressed and what are the ways that they approve to do it. So it's just sort of different nomenclature for each side, but a lot of times it's sort of a similar effort. It's just the motivation and means are a little bit different.
Okay, so we've kind of talked about, how voters may look at polling in terms of who's leading, who's losing, what issues ahead, how should candidates look at polling? And more importantly, I think for someone like me, how should candidates use polling in their campaign? Because I think oftentimes we think of polling as only being about getting the public's opinion on something. But how can candidates use polling to kind of shape their campaign as we get into an election season?
Well, the goal typically is 50% plus one. And
That's my goal every election. Yeah.
That's the goal.
And by the way, I want to be the 50% plus one.
It's, a lot of my work is, trying to figure signal from noise. It's what do voters or customers actually think, not what the loudest voices are saying. You're in the legislature, you have a lot of loud voices up there. But is that really what voters think about? So if you're looking at it as a candidate, what I would look for is it's directional. So what are the three issues that has the widest support within my district, state, county, whatever? That's what you're looking at. Not what are the three most important. It's the three with the widest reach that you can have the most impact with the greatest number of constituents. That's sort of the way I look at it. What you're testing for is to finding out what messages they respond to, what groups maybe don't know what their awareness is of you as a candidate, all of those different types of things. So it's sort of a roadmap of where you should go and sort of the things that matter that you need to address for constituents. It's not, the biggest issue that I have with clients a lot of time is the things they want to talk about versus what voters or what customers want to talk about. It may be you may have a business problem that you need addressed, but your customers have a problem that they need addressed, and that's kind of what you have to look at.
I think that is so true. I think we, as speaking as a candidate, we intuitively want to think we know what's important to people. Mm-hmm. And that may be true, but it may not be the things that actually move people or get people to move towards you.
I'll share you a trick I use with businesses a lot of time. I'll ask their senior management to answer the same survey we're about to give their customers and see how close they get and how they think they're going to answer. And it usually gives you an idea of how close they are to their customers. Same thing with voters. Same thing. The candidate, how well do you know your district? Those types of things.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, of course, we all believe we know our district, perfectly well, as I'm sure those executives feel like, and then they get the answers back, and they're like in completely opposite ends of the spectrum. I hope that's not true with my voters. I hope they feel like I know. But well, we'll stop talking about that. Do you find is polling easier, and this may be I may not be phrasing this question right, but is polling easier in a smaller district, like in a state house district or a county commission district, or is it easier in a statewide kind of polling or a national polling? Is one of those more difficult to achieve than the other, or is if you can get the right number of participants, it really doesn't matter?
State legislative districts, the smaller the geography, the more difficult it is. The more narrow the audience you're trying to reach, it doesn't matter if you're looking for left-handed Lutherans or if you're trying to do a small state rep in East Tennessee, let's say. Those types of polls, you're usually 200 or 300 respondents, and the margin of error on those is about 5 to 6%. So the wide range of options that could occur is much greater. So it is much harder to do. And you have a much smaller pool of people to get to cooperate with the survey and to recruit.
So what's your advice to, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I've got to go when these things flash across the synapse in my brain. What is your advice to the candidate who's in one of those kind of smaller districts about polling? How do they need to combine or look at polling in a larger sense, or is there value for them to poll in those small districts when the margin of error could be so high?
There is a lot of value in it if it's done correctly and invest in it. I think it is, I'm not saying this from a personal standpoint, but it's very important to do because it gives you a better sense of what's actually going on. Even though, the range of possibilities is a bit higher, it does help you get an idea of directionally where things are going. Okay, so where it really, if you do a poll and say you're up by 3 points and there's a wide range of options, you're probably up. How far, that's in question, but you may have a lead. Or if you're behind, it gives you an idea. It's like, hey, there's an issue here. What's going on? How do we address it? So I think there's a lot of
how do you guys know what to ask? I mean, how do you decide, if you're trying to find out what's important to people, and I know I'm sounding very elementary in this, and I apologize because this is your field of expertise, but if you're trying to find out what's important to people, how do you know what questions to ask in order to find out what's important to people?
If there are resources available, and this, it doesn't matter if we're, a product or a candidate, you want to do focus groups first. You want to do qualitative research. Qualitative, what we're doing is sitting down and having conversations with voters, people, businesses, etc., finding out the language they use. All right. It's more language than actually trying to quantify anything. It's like, what are the things they're talking about? When they talk about affordability, what does that mean to them? What is their concerns? And then you take that information, craft the questions, and then try to quantify the learnings. In a perfect world, that's kind of the way it works. And affordability is a good example of that. Everybody's talking about it nationally, but what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And I've done some work on it. We've used some AI moderation tools that we've been testing out as well to do this. And in a lot of sense, not to go too far down the economics road, we're talking about deflation, right? And so the way I kind of hear it is, when we ask voters, it's like, how are you doing personally? Oh yeah, financially I'm okay. But they know a neighbor down the street is having issues. They've got a kid that's trying to buy a home and can't do it. And those are the things that they're concerned about. But in that specific case, they don't want the home value deflation of their home coming down. They want to make it easier for their kid to buy a home so they don't have to move away to another area, especially in expensive areas like Knoxville, which is getting more and more expensive in that market. And here in Nashville, obviously, it's an issue.
Yeah. But again, and again, as someone who doesn't do this, you're like, yeah, I get that, but how do these people figure out the questions to ask, right? Which is what y'all do. I mean, that's your job. You figure out the questions to ask to get the responses.
Well, in
that candidates
yeah,
need.
in that specific case, we hear affordability in a focus group, let's say, and then we start probing a little bit further, and they start talking about, well, the example on making it easier to buy homes. So then it leads to interest rates. So then we'll take that information and go say rank order, in these questions, what's most important to you. And then you may ask, what's most impactful. And oftentimes, groceries, things that cut across renters, homeowners, et cetera, those types of things. And then we go in and quantify that as well. And then we spend a lot of time crafting those questions to make sure they're fair and balanced and they're not leading. You mentioned push polling earlier. That's what a push poll is. It's leading questions to try to push people against or for something. So that's the big difference. We're trying to get public opinion right.
Do you think that people who get push polling, that it pushes them one way or the other, or is it just those that already believe what they're pushing, it just hardens them, and the other people who don't believe it anyway just kind of throw it in the trash?
They don't believe it. Some might chuckle sometimes, or it may confirm their priors. And that's something else in this current environment is so polarized. The hardest thing you can do is to try to convince somebody to change their mind about a topic, an issue, or a person right now. Everybody's sort of in camp A or camp B, red or blue. And getting them to move, and you're talking about the industry, oftentimes people think pollsters, are trying to trick people, like changing this one word. If we do this, then it's immediately going to change their minds. If you're a volunteer fan, there's nothing I can say it's going to make you pull for Alabama, okay, or Florida, depending on your age. And we're kind of locked into that. But what you can find are areas of agreement between those two camps. So here are the three issues that all three, and that combination to get you to that 50% plus one, or get it passed in the legislature if you're trying to get a bill through.
That's interesting. Is polling in a state like Tennessee that has a pretty strong Republican majority and pretty strong conservative, let's just say, personality, is polling in a state like Tennessee easier or more difficult?
It's easier in the sense of picking the winners. Sometimes the margins is where you get tripped up. So, we're a plus 30 state, basically. And, is it candidate going to win by 23 points, 30 points, or 33 points? It kind of depends. The congressional districts is probably where more of the action is, like in the 5th and the 7th. Those are a little bit narrower because they've got pieces of Nashville split between them. So those areas and primaries involved in those areas are a lot more interesting sometimes, I think, than the national stuff or the state.
It, and listen, this is a fascinating conversation for me because I don't know that much about polling. I've done polling. I've used polling. When it comes back and I don't agree with what it tells me, I, of course, say this is a useless poll and why did I pay this person to do it? When it comes back and says what I wanted it to say, I say this is the greatest pollster I've ever met in my whole life. Right? But when candidates use polling, does you've talked about it helping, candidates understand what the issues are for their constituency out there. Does polling, when candidates report on polling, does that give candidates credibility? I'm not sure how I'm trying to articulate what's going on in my head, but when you call and people hear Bo Watson's name mentioned in this polling, does that give credibility to the candidate because somebody's asking about it?
Yeah, it's a tough one because let's say that you're running for governor and your internals are telling you you're ahead and you see press that's showing you're down 3-6 points, something like that, and you know it's ridiculous. Your instinct is, to put out the press release and show this is what's actually happening. The downside is they know it's coming from the candidate. Conversely, if you're down on the other side of the coin and you're trying to convince people that it's a dead heat, you're also putting out, your press release about your internal poll, et cetera. So I don't, as a outside, if you're reading that or hearing it, I kind of discount it a lot of times. And I think probably most voters do most of the time.
Well, you just stepped on one that I want to, before I have to say goodbye to you, because this has been, for me, it's been fascinating. May not have been fascinating for you, but it's been a great conversation for me. Help me understand internal polling versus, I guess the opposite would be external polling. I'm assuming that when we poll internally, we're really trying to get the true answer. And external polling might be, more push polling or less directed polling, more general in nature. But internal polling should be it should be kind of the truth serum for the candidate. Am I reading your language right?
You're absolutely correct. Like I said, that's the roadmap. It's giving you direction on who to talk to, what to talk about, and how to reach the widest audience within your district. Let's say that's the key for it.
So, prescriptive-wise, as the doctor of polling, how often should a candidate or even someone already in an elected office, how often should they internally poll?
Historically, let's just say if you were running for governor, you would, do a benchmark poll, in February and March, and then you would do a brush fire probably in July. And the benchmark is basically take a look at the issue set, where you are, what people are concerned about, and how you should try to address it, and what sort of the roadmap. The brush fire, in the summertime, you're looking at how well have you done so far and where are you in the election. Now, if you're in a resource heavy campaign, if you're running for governor in California, let's say Arizona or someplace like that, it's more competitive. You may do tracking polls as you get closer to election day and to see how well you're doing. You do it through October and right up to, day of. So it gives you an idea of how many voters you need to turn out, and it's more structural in that manner.
What's the difference between a tracking poll and just regular polling? I mean, I guess you're selecting specific issues to see if they're changing or not?
No, what you do is you take the same set of questions and horse race type questions, and you do it night after night. But instead of doing 1,000 each night, you're doing 200. And what we do is we average it. So you may do like a 3-day rolling average, let's say. And it sort of gives you a sort of a neutral line to show what is the direction of the election at that point as you get closer to election day. It's more of, a barometer and status check on where you are each day. And that's sort of the value of it. And one other thing we didn't talk about is also testing advertising and creative. For larger campaigns that have a lot of money, we'll do, all kinds of studies with voters and have them watch campaign ads for both sides, measure their interests, their attitudes, those types of things around it. So that's another element that's completely different. But, for your average, for a smaller race, it's like that. You don't have the resources to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The reason I ask you about the state legislative, House, Senate, and then like local county commission kind of races is that, one of the things we try to do on this show is talk about that kind of level. I mean, when you talk about national polls and all that kind of stuff, it just doesn't translate to that local district as well. I'm hoping that folks at the local level who see this will kind of try and figure out how can I use some level of polling to help me not only assess, how I'm doing in terms of understanding what's the issues in my local district, but then for those who are running for office, what kind of polling can I afford to do, or what kind of polling can I be a part of, maybe collaboratively with other folks to figure out, what's going on in their particular district. And that's why I wanted to talk a lot about keeping it, in these smaller polls, which are more difficult to do and which are more difficult to predict.
And I would say almost as valuable. Very valuable to do. And, we talked about the national. It's good to have that as sort of a set of where everybody is. And the reason I say that, and one of the things that's changed a lot since I've been in those businesses, we're now more a country of anywheres than somewheres. So I can do a focus group in other areas of the country and I'll hear the same things here, and looking at that to at least have a starting point about some of the things you should think about. Yes, if you have a dump that's approved and it's a local zoning issue and those types of things and people are upset about it, that is the dominant thing you need to be talking about. But in terms of affordability and those types of things, are there things that can be done at the local level to try to assist with that? So those types of things.
Well, this, as a political junkie and as an elected official, this has been a fascinating conversation for me. I know about polling. I want to pretend like I understand polling. I've had polls done and looked at them and had absolutely no idea exactly what they were trying to tell me other than these are the 2 or 3 things you need to focus on. But it is a science. It's like, you're an economist by training, I guess, and it's like economics. I read a book on economics one time where the guy said, we're not an exact science. We are correct when we are given the proper assumptions, but if you give us a different set of assumptions, we might be wrong. I think polling's much the same way. If we assume the wrong things, then the poll can appear to be wrong, not because the poll's wrong, but because we assume the wrong things. And so I think that's really, really interesting. So I want to thank you, Randy, for being on Tennessee Today. It's been a great conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Totally enjoyed it. Loved every minute. I don't get to talk about the industry in a positive manner. Oftentimes we're defending ourselves a lot of times, so it's nice to
welcome to my world. Yeah. Hey, folks, this has been Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson with another episode of Tennessee Today. Look, if you enjoyed today's episode, or maybe if you didn't enjoy it but you want to be helpful that maybe I can do a better episode next time, if you would, please send us a comment, but also check the button at the bottom of the like or subscribe or whatever your particular service might have. It helps get the show out to more people and allows us to communicate and educate people about all these different political things within the state of Tennessee. So, again, we'll see you next time.